Welcome to 60 Skills, and the topic of today's discussion is pathworking. Well, what is pathworking? Pathworking is generally used in esoteric circles as a way to describe the process by which you can generate a sigil for a spirit entity. Now, classically speaking, there are three main ways to do this. One, you have the issue of magic squares or the kame, which are related to the planets. Two, you have the use of mental wondering vis-a-vis an internal power arrangement. Or three, you have automatic writing. So today we're going to talk about the different advantages and disadvantages of using each one of these systems. First, we have the magic square system, or the kame as they're sometimes referred to. Now, these are a series of numbered squares that are related to the numbers of the planets. These work, in fact, fairly well for the inner classical planets from the Moon out to Saturn. What you tend to do is you invoke the energy of a given planet, and then you generate the magic square by translating the name of the entity that you have in question into Hebrew characters, and then using their numbers of the Hebrew characters to bounce off of the numbers in the magic square. Again, this process is very old and has been used a lot. Its main limitation is the fact that there's no real agreement on what the numbering scheme for magic squares should be for the outer planets, let alone something like the zodiac. So as long as you're working with the inner planets, again, the Luna sphere to Saturn, this works relatively well. Outside of that, you're kind of on your own, and people tend to have pretty mixed results. Now, some argue that you can do the outer planets by running them through their ruling inner planet. So in this case, Neptune would be Venus, Uranus would be Mercury, and so on and so on. Again, this is an approach worth exploring, but at this point in time, there's no real agreement on whether or not this works well enough to be considered reliable. All right, now we're going to talk about the second part of pathworking. The second method of pathworking involves the use of mental wondering. Now, mental wondering, or as I like to refer to it as an internal power system, is problematic in that it requires, if not mastery, at least a proficient level of skill in a variety of topics. So first, you have to be able to mental wonder in the first place. Second, you have to have sufficient clair skills, or clairvoyance and clairaudience, to be able to communicate with the entity in question that you're attempting to contact. Additionally, you need to be able to generate the planetary, zodiacal, or elemental energy at a sufficiently great strength to allow you to keep your consciousness in the proper sphere of activity. Now again, if you have the ability to do this, and you, oh by the way, also have the akasha necessary to banish the entity in the event you make a mistake and contact an entity that's, well, let's just say not to your liking, all of this can work well. Of course, there is also the limitation of delusion. Are you imagining this? Are you not imagining this? What are you really hearing, and who and what are you really talking to? So these are issues there. And that is really the weakness of the internal power or mental wondering method, is you need a lot of really high-level skills to pull this off to the degree that it's reliable. And because you're dealing directly with your own perceptions, well, there's always the chance that you are in fact getting it wrong. Now, one way to work around this is to work in groups, either individually, each of you trying to contact a given kind of entity, separately on your own, or as a consolidated group. What I can tell you is that if you use the consolidated group method, this tends to work fairly well and is a method that was used frequently in the past. Sometimes the sigils you get match those of classical description, sometimes you don't. But that's another issue for a different time. So let's get on to method number 3, otherwise known as automatic writing, or in some circles, spirit possession. Now, the way this works is very simple. You generate the energy of the planet or zodiac or other form you're looking for. You go in and you program your mind and say, okay, I want to talk to a spirit about this, or I want to invoke a spirit of this, whatever that thing is. You then place your attention on your writing hand and you draw a sigil with this entity guiding the movement of your hand. Again, the issue of delusion is a big problem with this, but there's another issue that no one really wants to talk about. And that issue is one of spirit possession. You see, once you invite the thing into you, unless you have the internal power skills vis-a-vis Akasha or another banishing ritual, getting rid of the thing might be a little tricky. And that's where you can get into trouble. So again, there's nothing wrong with this method, and particularly if your clairvoyance and clairaudience are not particularly good, this can be a viable course of action. But do keep in mind all 3 of these things, use of the magic squares, mental wandering or internal power, and the use of automatic writing, all come with their various advantages and disadvantages. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about what you get out of this. Now, what do you get through the process of pathworking? Well, if you're using the sigil associated with a well-known grimoire, you tend to basically end up getting the telephone number to the secretary at the front desk of a corporation. With time and experience, most entities will end up giving you a personal sigil to use. Depending upon the method utilized in pathworking, you can start with a personal sigil to begin with. Now, what this will do is it will deepen your relationship with the entity in question. And this is where you need to be careful. Just as most people can be summed up by the total of their 6 closest friends, this is also true regarding these entities. The more involved you get with them, the more they tend to influence your behavior. This can be a good thing, or this can be a bad thing. And keep in mind, these entities exist without a body and they don't sleep. So they can work you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, unless you have enough Akasha that you can keep them on their toes. So the advantage to using a more well-known sigil is there's a bit of a barrier between you and the entity. The disadvantage is you're frequently not going to get very specific information that's actionable. The more close, or the closer you get to an entity through things like personal sigils, the more specific the information you are going to get as is related to you. But again, now you have more of a relationship with the entity. So that's a little speech today about pathworking and sigils and what you get out of it. So if you enjoyed all this, consider subscribing to the channel, and I hope to see you around. Train hard and be well.